Years old when NATO was founded. April 4th, 1949, Washington, D.C., 12 nations signed a treaty that said something remarkable, something that had never been tried before on this scale. They said, we will defend each other. If one of us is attacked, all of us are attacked. An attack on Belgium is an attack on America. An attack on Norway is an attack on France. We stand together or we fall separately. Article 5, they called it, the Collective Defense Clause. And for 77 years it worked. 77 years. Think about that. Nearly 8 decades without a major war between the nations that had just finished tearing each other apart. No French and Germans killing each other. No British and Italians at war. No Americans and Europeans in conflict. NATO didn't just prevent war, it created peace, real peace. The kind of peace that let generations grow up without fear. The kind of peace that let my generation, the generation that remembered the war, raise children who couldn't imagine one. I'm 89 years old now. I've lived through 77 years of NATO keeping that promise. 77 years of that treaty holding, until now. On January 7th, 2026, the White House issued a statement about Greenland. Greenland, a territory of Denmark, which is a founding member of NATO, a nation that has stood with the United States since 1949, an ally, a friend, a treaty partner. The White House statement said this: President Trump has made it well known that acquiring Greenland is a national security priority of the United States. Then it said, the president and his team are discussing a range of options to pursue this important foreign policy goal, and of course, utilizing the U.S. military is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal. Utilizing the U.S. military against a NATO ally, against a nation we are treaty-bound to defend. Let me say that again, because I need you to understand what this means. The United States is threatening to use military force to seize territory from Denmark, a nation we promised to defend, a nation that under Article 5 of the NATO treaty, we are obligated to protect if anyone attacks them. We're not just breaking the treaty, we're becoming the threat the treaty was designed to prevent. When I was 12 years old, watching the news about NATO's founding, I believed something. I believed that the world had learned from the war, that we understood finally that might doesn't make right, that treaties matter, that alliances are sacred, that powerful nations can't just take what they want from weaker ones. For 77 years, I believed NATO proved that. Donald Trump's senior advisor, Stephen Miller, went on CNN and said something that should terrify anyone who understands history. He said, the United States should have Greenland as part of the United States. When asked if the U.S. would use military force to take it, he said, nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland. Then he said something that revealed everything about how this administration thinks. He said, we live in a world that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power. These are the iron laws of the world since the beginning of time. The iron laws, strength, force, power. That's not NATO. That's the opposite of NATO. That's what NATO was created to stop, because Miller is wrong. The world isn't governed by force, or at least it wasn't for 77 years. For 77 years, the Western world was governed by treaties, by alliances, by the principle that nations don't invade their neighbors, don't seize territory by force, don't act like empires. NATO was the proof. NATO was the alternative. NATO was what we built instead of empire. And now the United States, the nation that created NATO, that led NATO, that benefited most from NATO, is threatening to destroy it. Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen understood what this means. She said it plainly. If the United States chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops. That is, including our NATO and thus the security that has been provided since the end of the Second World War. Everything stops. That's what she said, because she's right. If the United States invades Greenland, NATO is finished. Not because Denmark will leave, but because the entire premise of the alliance, that we defend each other, will be destroyed. How can Article 5 survive if the nation that invokes it most is also the nation violating it? How can we ask Estonia to trust that we'll defend them from Russia if we're invading Denmark? How can we expect Poland to believe in collective defense if we're the ones attacking our allies? NATO survives on trust, on the belief that when you're threatened, your allies will stand with you. Break that trust, and the alliance dies. Not officially, but practically, because no one will believe the treaty means anything anymore. On Tuesday, January 7th, 7 European leaders, France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, the United Kingdom, and Denmark, issued a joint statement. They said, Greenland belongs to its people. It is for Denmark and Greenland, and them only, to decide on matters concerning Denmark and Greenland. It was a remarkably restrained statement, given the circumstances. They didn't threaten. They didn't condemn. They simply stated the obvious. Greenland isn't America's to take. Trump's response came on Truth Social. He wrote, "The United States will always be there for NATO, even if they won't be there for us." Read that carefully. Trump is angry that European allies won't support America seizing Greenland. He sees their defense of Denmark, a NATO member, as a betrayal of the United States. That's how far we've fallen. From an attack on one is an attack on all to, if you won't help me attack, you're betraying me. Let me tell you what Greenland is. It's an island, 836,000 square miles, 57,000 people. It's part of Denmark, but it's self-governing. It has its own parliament, its own prime minister, its own elections. And the people of Greenland have made it very clear. They don't want to be part of the United States, but Greenland has something else. Rare earth minerals, oil, gas, natural resources worth trillions. And it sits between North America and Europe in the Arctic, where Russia and China are expanding their influence. So Trump wants it. And he's decided that because he wants it, he should have it. And if Denmark won't sell it and Greenland won't agree to it, well, the U.S. military is always an option. That phrase keeps echoing in my mind. The U.S. military is always an option. It's the same language empires use. It's what Britain said about India. It's what Japan said about Korea. It's what every powerful nation says when it wants something from a weaker nation and doesn't care about treaties or sovereignty or rights. And it's what the United States spent 77 years saying we would never say again. I think about the men who founded NATO. I think about what they lived through. The war that killed 60 million people, the Holocaust, the bombings, the starvation, the absolute horror of what happens when powerful nations decide that might makes right. And I think about what they built to prevent that from ever happening again. A treaty, an alliance, a promise, Article 5. For 77 years, that promise held. I'm 89 years old. I was 12 when NATO was founded. I've lived my entire adult life under the protection of that alliance, the peace it created, the stability it guaranteed, and I'm watching it die. Not because an enemy destroyed it, not because it failed, but because the nation that created it decided it doesn't need it anymore. Because Trump wants Greenland. And if NATO stands in the way, then NATO can fall. Here's what terrifies me most. This isn't theoretical anymore. This isn't Trump talking big. This isn't empty rhetoric. 3 days before he threatened Greenland, Trump invaded Venezuela. He captured their president. He declared that the United States would run their country. He said American oil companies would take control of their resources. He did it. He actually did it. So when he says the U.S. military is an option for Greenland, when his advisor says nobody will fight the United States over it, when his advisor's wife posts a picture of Greenland with an American flag and the caption, "Soon," I believe them. They're not joking. They're planning. And if they do it, if American forces land in Greenland, if we seize territory from Denmark, NATO is finished, the alliance dies, the treaty becomes meaningless. The peace we've had for 77 years ends, not with a war between enemies, but with a betrayal by the nation that promised to protect us all. I don't know if Trump will actually invade Greenland. Maybe this is all bluster. Maybe he's trying to scare Denmark into some kind of negotiation. Maybe cooler heads will prevail. But I know this, the fact that we're even having this conversation means something has already broken. The fact that the White House can say military force is always an option about a NATO ally and not immediately retract it, not apologize, not clarify, that tells you everything about where we are. Article 5 says an attack on one NATO member is an attack on all. For 77 years, that meant if Russia attacked Denmark, America would defend Denmark. Now it might mean if America attacks Denmark, Europe has to defend Denmark from us, from the nation that created the treaty, from the ally they trusted most. I was 12 years old when NATO was founded. I'm 89 now. I thought I would die in a world protected by that alliance. Instead, I'm watching the alliance die, killed not by enemies, but by the nation that needed it least and benefited from it most. 77 years of peace, ending not with a war, but with a threat to an ally over an island. That's not strength. That's not power. That's not making America great. That's betrayal. That's the end of trust. That's what empires do right before they fall. I'm 89 years old. I've seen a lot. I've watched nations rise and fall. I've watched alliances form and break, and I'm watching NATO, the greatest alliance in history, the alliance that kept peace for 77 years, being destroyed by the nation that created it, for Greenland, for rare earth minerals, for a president who can't accept that some things aren't for sale. I was 12 when NATO was founded. I believed in it my whole life. I never thought I'd live to see it die. I was 12 years old when NATO was founded, April 4th, 1949.